Hey guys, this is Freddy Frogs, certified Ableton trainer and point blank instructor. If you want to learn more Ableton techniques, make sure you check out our courses at pointblanklondon.com. So let's explore Sampler. Sampler is a part of the Ableton suite, so if you only have the standard, you won't find it under your instrument tab. Sampler is Simpler's big brother. There are many noticeable differences between the two, and the main one being that Simpler is now fitted with the warping engine, the warping technology. Sampler is not. So why do we need Sampler when we have Simpler? Well, Sampler can be loaded with multiple samples at once, enabling us to achieve a very important production technique, multi-sampling. So we'll take a closer look at multi-sampling in the next tutorial, but for now, let's just take a quick tour of the interface of that great sampler. So Sampler has different tabs right here. We can open the Zone tab to drop the samples, and it reveals a new window here. This is where you'll drop your samples. So let's go and reach for two different samples. Let's drop them right in there. Great. So the two samples are now loaded in Sampler, and they have been spread across the whole keys here, all the keys of the piano. So if I trigger a note here, you see both samples are playing. Let's listen to them one at a time. That's the first one. That's the second one. And now both of them together. So we can layer samples that way, but we can also separate them by spreading them across different keys like so. So now when I trigger this key, I get that sample. When I trigger that key, I get this sample. So we can spread them, and this is to achieve again multi-sampling. So let's bring them back both onto all the keys. We can also spread them with velocity, so that each of the sample responds to a specific velocity. So if I send that note now, you see I triggered the top sample. If I lower the velocity, I've triggered this sample. So again, achieving better multi-sampling. Okay, so selector is a MIDI selector to enable us to decide or determine what chain, what sample receives the MIDI data. So let's now move over to the sample window. The sample window will affect only the sample displayed in the window here. So all the parameters at the bottom here will only affect that sample. Now, if you want to affect multiple samples at once, you multi-select the samples here in the Zone tab using the Shift key on your computer keyboard, and now all the parameters here will affect every sample you have selected. So if I trigger a note now, you see both samples are triggered. But if I now go and change the root key, which is something we can't do on Simpler, you can see here the little R icon moving as I move that value, and both these samples are changing their root key simultaneously. So that's something we can't do on Simpler. Let's go back to C3. Now let's focus on one of the samples now. Good, so we can of course have a looping function here with these two buttons here, and the loop can be defined here in values, or you can also trim it manually over here. So let's enable the loop here. This is a forward loop. We can go forward and backwards. Amazing. Now we can also have a release time. So let's add release time to our amplifier envelope at first. Let's bring a little bit more of it. And you can see the release time happening, but I can define now a different loop just for the release. Look, this is going to be, let's trim it here. This is it. I can now trim the release loop, and I can say, okay, well, the release will happen in this zone. Listen. Like so. And now we're moving over. Okay, so if I move the actual sample loop here, I can have a different starting point, and if I link it, I can have the same starting point for the sample and the loop. So way more control than we have in Simpler, yeah? The other three tabs here, the pitch, oscillator, filter global, and modulation, will affect every sample in the sampler. Let's move over to the filter global tab first. This is where you'll find your ADSR for your amplifier. Like so. So this behaves exactly like you would expect from an ADSR. However, you have a looping function which is pretty neat if you ask me. You can loop the ADSR so it goes AD and then goes back to A. So AD, AD, AD. You can hear that little looping I've implemented now. Let's move the sample to a different point here. Yeah, you can hear now properly what I was talking about when I talked about the loop here. Okay, here we have the filter, and in that filter you'll find all the circuit types. There's a shaper to make the filter even stronger. And you have a morph function here, so let's choose the morph engine here. This was implemented before 9.5, by the way. Like so. Okay, let's bring a little bit more sustain. So way more control than we have in simpler, yeah? We have a filter envelope, of course. Let's bring it in. And then what's really interesting in sampler is that pitch oscillator tab. So here we have the pitch envelope. Let's bring it up. You can really hear the sample going down. Like so. But what's really different here is the oscillator tab. This is an amazing function. Here we can modulate the frequency of the sample using a different oscillator here. So let's bring its volume up so we can hear it clearly. Okay, so you can clearly hear the modulation happening. We can determine the coarse tune, the speed of the modulation, you could say, and here the shape of the modulation. Amazing. Here we can modulate the amplitude of the sample, like a ring modulator. This can also be looped, by the way, just to add some more complexity here. Let's bring this down in terms of length. And you can hear the looping happening here, yeah? Amazing sound design abilities we have with that. We have the modulation tab. We have 3 LFOs that can be sent across the platform. Okay, so you determine here where you want to send it. This one is hardwired to volume, filter, pitch and pan, but these ones are freely assigned, you see. So way more control. We have an auxiliary envelope that can also be addressed or sent to whatever you want within the sampler. Great sound design abilities again. Here, finally, the MIDI tab. This is the expression tab. As I said earlier on, the sampler will mostly be used to multi-sample, to reproduce the sound of a real instrument or the sound of a synthesizer. Well, this tab here would enable us to give it expression just like a real instrument would. For example, you can send the keys to change the volume or the filter, whatever you want. You can send the aftertouch, so if you have a push 2, this is great because the aftertouch is enabled on push 2 and you can determine what the aftertouch will modulate. You can send the modulation wheel wherever you want, in 2 different destinations as well. You can control the range of the pitch band, so many more things we cannot do in simpler. You see, I told you it's simpler's big brother. It's a really comprehensive sampler. I love using it. Just to finalize this little tour, one important function: you can turn your sampler instrument into a simpler instrument, and you can do the same in simpler. If you right click onto the name here of the sampler, you'll have access to the sampler simpler function. So now your sampler becomes a simpler. Everything remains the same, but you have less control, therefore easier to manipulate. And the same thing can be achieved the other way around. If you build a simpler instrument and you want now to have more control over the sound, you can right click on the name of the simpler and turn it into a sampler. You can then achieve many more things using the sampler.